innovative franchise that spans 9 movies over 5 decades with a recent TV show, even several video games throughout the years, it's amassed a cult following from sci-fi lovers everywhere for its iconic Xenomorphs, strong female protagonists, and an impressive amount of questionable airshafts. I came into this series fresh. I had never seen a single one before, and I decided I was going to make this video. So I'll be as objective as possible, breaking down the fantastic, the horrible, and everything in between. And at the end of the video, I'll give you my personal ranking for each film, worst to best, but for the sake of continuity, and since I watched these in release order, let's start at the top. Alien. I cannot imagine what it was like watching this movie originally in theaters. It's so broody and dark, and if I hadn't have already seen the clips, because I think everybody has, where the chest burster pops out, that jump scare would have messed me up. One of the strangest things about this film, especially looking back because I had no frame of reference for it, is just how different it is to pretty much every other film in the franchise. It's slower paced and honestly more of a horror movie than anything, while most of the sequels spin off into action and adventure. Additionally, while there's always a tinge of social critique woven through the rest of these movies, this one tackles it the most subtly and I think in one of the most powerful ways. Or at least, in a way that you feel it most tangibly through the eyes of the characters. And it's a masterclass in doing so minimally. Ash, the rogue android, represents the entirety of the Weyland Corporation, and of course, by extent, critiques any real-world, evil, profit-bent corporations. You don't have to see the extent of the company's control across the galaxy because it's all contained within the crew and their dependence on it for their livelihood. And it's totally believable that in some dystopian future, there's a tyrannical galactic company that the average Joe is absolutely powerless against. I'm just glad no companies like that exist today. I'm sure they can never get away with something this terrible, right? The reason this one hits so hard, and a thing I harp on a lot in this channel, is because you're invested in the protagonist and even the other members of the crew. Pause. Sigourney Weaver, by the way, absolute queen. Don't ever give me that trope of, oh, Hollywood can't make a good female protagonist, because that's a lie. Because they can. Ridley Scott did it in the 70s. May I present Ellen Ripley. Please continue. The actors do a great job of showing the audience that they really care about each other. They presumably been on this ship for, I don't know, a decade, however long it is. It's just a shipping vessel, and this is their crew. So they get along, they have their own quirks and interpersonal dynamics, and it's super believable to me. It also makes it more impactful when they're worried about their crewmate and the facehugger, and then one by one as they get maunched by the Xenomorph. A big part of that, I actually have a line here on my notes, is the dialogue. Screenplay is written by Daniel O'Bannon, and what I love is that he uses the mundane to help you become immersed in the world that he's creating. They don't have to explain certain things about the company or about space travel, you're just kind of thrown into it, and you have to figure it out as you go. Because obviously everything they're talking about is common knowledge to the characters, so why would you have someone go explain the whole thing? It's excellent. It really annoys me when a script tells you about the world instead of showing you. It's a visual medium. Jeez. Speaking of visual medium, one of the things that I thought about while watching this was, did this come out before or after the original Star Wars? And the answer is 2 years after. That makes me wonder if Ridley Scott took some inspiration from George Lucas's directorial decisions, like especially when it comes to miniatures for spacecraft and getting that whole spacey feel back in the 70s. Obviously, it's two completely different genres and stylistically nothing alike, but I can't help but think that there was some overlap there. You guys can tell me what you think in the comments. You probably know a lot more about it than I do. But for a film that came out this long ago, I just have to say the effects look great. And though the iconic chestburster running off the table scene looks a little clunky and goofy now, it still holds up pretty well. And it's kind of defined how the Xenomorphs move throughout the rest of the series. And of course, wrapping it up, the classic ending where Ripley throws the alien out into the void of space and is adrift in the black void is iconic, and she really sets the precedent for all films going forward. Overall, Alien is really solid. I'm going to put it firmly in A tier, and it's going to be very hard to top, especially considering some of these other ones. Aliens. Yes, Aliens with an S, James Cameron's big follow-up to the sci-fi hit thriller. Ironically, the thing I wrote in my notes about this one is very James Cameron. If you've ever seen any other James Cameron movies like Avatar or Titanic or whatever, you know what I mean. He's good at making what you see on the screen larger than life. Things are very big and bold. Avatar is probably the most well-known one by James Cameron, and just imagine Avatar in space. Actually, heck, they've even got the big mech suits. What's with James Cameron and big sci-fi mech suits? Screw it, I don't care if this came out 30 years before, this is now a prequel to Avatar. Okay, now there was a 7-year gap between the release of the first two, but I watched them back to back in 2025, so compared to Ridley Scott's original, watching the first one and then this one gives me serious thematic and stylistic whiplash.
Not quite my tempo.
Whereas the first one is more broody and dark, this one is much more, you know? But I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. Each one can stand on its own pretty well. It's just strange looking at them straight back to back. At best, it helps you gain a new perspective on the world and the characters, and at worst, it takes you out of the universe a tiny little bit. I think one of the main reasons this has been well received and why it works, even though it's so different stylistically, is because both are critiquing the same thing. James Cameron is still critiquing the Weyland Corporation and corporate greed and capitalism, all that good stuff, just in a different way. He's displaying their arrogance and ignorance of the xenomorph threat, while Ripley is watching as their entire team gets torn apart after her PTSD from the first one. Compared to the original, it's much more thriller than horror. Ridley Scott chose to make Weyland less of an immediate danger, but more of a brooding, looming threat, and that was ultimately surpassed by the danger of the Xenomorphs. In this sequel, and his very big, blockbuster, in-your-face James Cameron style, the director chooses to make it much more adventurous and escalates the physical danger, raising the stakes by even bringing a child into the mix and a bunch more Xenomorphs. And while it strays from the first movie's horror a bit, I think it pretty well expands on the world that Ridley Scott created. As a side note, because James Cameron wrote this screenplay, the dialogue is very iconic as well, making Ellen much more charming and quippy. I also like that he makes her the sort of mother figure to Newt the kid, and it gives the audience a new reason to be invested in the character's well-being, and also helps make Ripley seem more compassionate and self-sacrificial. This movie also expands a lot more on the intelligence of the Xenomorphs, showing that they have problem-solving skills and why they are the apex predator in this universe. That's so cool. And I like that Bishop, the android in this one, gets to help save the day at the end. It's a good way of wrapping it back to the original, where Ellen is traumatized by a corporate, bureaucratic puppet in the form of Ash, but this one gets redemption. Redemption for the synths. I love it. I also enjoyed them expanding on the life cycle and social structure of the Xenomorphs. Seeing the Queen for the first time and watching Ellen blast the eggs with a flamethrower would have been really cool to watch in cinemas. This one I'm also going to put in A tier. I won't put it higher than the original, gotta respect that one, but it's pretty darn good. There's no point in lowering it to B tier because of what we have coming up. Alien 3. To be frank, Alien 3 started off disappointing me, so it was already on shaky ground. It takes place right after the events of Aliens, with an S, and right off the bat, they kill the kid. Bruh. Newt gets the boot, if you will. Straight up, everybody you cared about from the last movie, except for Ridley, is killed on arrival. Not a great way to get me invested in your plot, I'm just saying. Just in general, though, the plot of this one isn't as great as the first two. Here it is in about 10 seconds. Ripley crash lands on this planet full of space monks who are actually criminals, and somehow they brought a xenomorph with them, and then she has to kill herself in order to prevent Weyland from getting the embryo. It's about as interesting as it sounds. Here's what a critic from the New York Daily said on Rotten Tomatoes that I liked. One assumes that Weaver received enough combat pay to compensate for playing the now understandably cynical Ripley in this bleak and pointlessly grueling movie. Honestly, looking back, I was more annoyed at this movie than I was expecting, just because it felt so forced and unrelated to the previous movies. It wasn't completely unenjoyable, but you didn't have the charm or the heart that the first two had. The stakes didn't feel as high because you don't care about the space criminals, and Ellen herself doesn't really seem to care about her life that much because she's so disillusioned with the world to begin with. She just lost the kid after all, and nowhere is that more clearly seen than at the end where she literally offs herself. I know this is supposed to be a big self-sacrificial moment for her and for the franchise, but it just felt like she was giving up. Aliens, with an S, did that much better by giving you the kid as someone to tangibly sacrifice for. This just feels ephemeral and almost pointless. Almost like you've invested 3 movies worth of your time in the protagonist only to lose them at the end. Yeah, it's not great. I honestly didn't have a whole lot else to say on this one. It was pretty forgettable. I'm just going to put it solidly in the C tier. Alien Resurrection. In all honesty, I didn't love this movie at first. It was kind of weird, and I didn't love that they brought Ellen back after she had just sacrificed herself in the last one. Seems a bit counterproductive, but as I established, Alien 3 was so forgettable and kind of bad in the grand scheme of things that at this point, I don't really care. Also, there was another 5-year gap between the release of these two movies, so the whiplash was a little more extreme for me than it would have been for audiences back then. The idea of cloning Ripley seems really viable in this universe and with the tech they have, and so this movie in particular leans much more into that sci-fi aspect of these movies rather than the horror. There's still lots of good action, and I absolutely love the sequence where they're fighting the Xenomorphs underwater. Not something you'd expect to see in space, and it really adds a new dimension to the struggle. And even though this movie doesn't really have that slow burn that the original did, one thing they do similar is the gore. Having captive humans to be the incubators for Xenomorphs is really creepy enough, and there's already some creepy cloning stuff that goes on with the bodies and all this nasty viscous fluid, as well as the scene at the end where the newborn gets violently sucked through this port into the void of space. And while we're on the topic, the whole newborn thing is kind of weird to me. So skipping ahead a bit, the weird mutated creature thing is actually a very common theme in these movies, and they establish that the Xenomorphs can kind of take on the traits of the host, which the facehugger implants onto, right? But I personally think the creepy hybrid in Romulus is the one that makes most sense to me because you've introduced the black engineer goo in Prometheus and stuff, and that's the catalyst for creating this ungodly thing. But in this one, I don't think it's explained very well, with it basically just being because Ripley is a weird clone and she's attached to the alien queen. Not that everything in a sci-fi movie needs to be explained, but it just pulled me out for a minute and I felt like they wanted to end with a big creepy monster instead of letting the plot progress naturally. I feel like they could have achieved the same amount of tension and progressed the plot along with just probably the regular Xenomorphs, honestly. But despite that, all those caveats, overall, I actually enjoyed this movie a lot more than I thought I would, especially looking back. There's some really good dialogue and emotional scenes. I really like when this guy wakes up and he's like, "What's inside me?" And nobody wants to answer him. Sigourney Weaver, of course, does a fantastic job, and she plays a really good, confused, psychopathic clone of her previous self. Now, let's talk about the ending. This one ends in spectacular fashion after violently defenestrating the newborn as the crew approaches Earth. Of course, if you've watched the series, you know that the tease never really leads to anything in the further movies because this is the furthest point in time chronologically that we've seen. It's a good idea in theory, but I would like to see that expanded upon. Maybe we'll get something in the future on this dystopian, Weyland-controlled Earth. Pause. For the record, I wrote most of this script before watching Alien Earth, so obviously the state of the Earth is expanded a little more upon in the series, but still has not passed this point chronologically. Continue. Also, Alien vs. Predator, literally the next movie to come out, sort of retcons the entire thing about humans never being exposed to the Xenomorphs before, but I digress. This is pretty solid, not as good as the original. I'm going to put it in B tier. Alien vs. Predator. This is the first of the series to be made within my lifetime, if that gives you any indication how old I am, and it certainly shows. The top thing I wrote in my notes, verbatim, very 2000s. Stylistically, it feels like a movie from the late 90s, early aughts. Lots of practical effects, big physical sets, and quick edits, but that's not to say it's bad, by any means. Again, in fact, I quite like this one. Of course, I was a literal child when this came out, so I wasn't around for the hype of the crossover between the two series. But I've got to say, I think it holds up pretty well. It pays respects to both franchises and their fans by portraying the Xenomorphs as the perfect creature, deadly and dangerous, and that makes them the prime hunt for the Predators, who are the smartest and by far the most technologically advanced. It feels like this strikes a good balance of portraying both in their own way while finding a plot that combines the two well. Now, we do have to ignore a lot about the themes and the tone of the rest of the Alien movies. This is by no means horror, and there's nothing about the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, which canonically doesn't even exist yet. The wiki says it was formed in 2012. And besides the fact that it has aliens in it, it's not super sci-fi. I'd categorize this more of an action film than anything. Also, like I said at the end of Ressurection, if Xenomorphs were already on Earth, then why did the Weyland Corporation not just find them preserved in Antarctica or something? Why would they even need the specimen from the original movie, or even need Ripley's clone? Anyway, we're just going to ignore that because I don't think they were thinking terribly hard about the world and continuity when they made this. Pause. Again, Alien Earth expands a little more on this, but there's still some minor plot holes, so whatever. Regardless of all those caveats, it's a solid film. I quite enjoyed this one for what it was. It feels much more down to earth than the previous two movies, pun intended. And I like the premise that these two species have a long-standing history together. The actual fighting that we see between the Predators and the Xenomorphs is cool and fun to watch, still riding that early 2000s feel. One thing I appreciated about this one is that they weren't afraid to kill people off. You couldn't really care less about the characters except for the protagonist lady. Now, usually that would lose points in my book since I'm a big fan of good character development, and it's awfully hard to flesh out a character once they've been ripped limb from limb. But I think in this instance, the creators knew that this movie was not about the humans. Without Sigourney or the other actors in the previous films of either franchise, you're really honing in on the feud between the aliens, and the humans are mostly there just to see the plot through their eyes. It's a weird exception, but I'll allow it. That said, some of the dialogue between the human characters is so cheesy, like so bad. I can't tell if it's the delivery or the writing itself, but it's terribly corny. Goes well with that 2000s vibe. As with all the Alien movies thus far, this needed some kind of unique big fight at the end, and they decided to go with the Alien Queen. This final sequence is pretty interesting to watch, and if you're not terribly interested in the protagonist, that is okay. Since again, both respect the franchises and have the fight take out both of them, and the human, can't even remember her name, is just kind of bumbling about when the predators come for the body of their comrade. Neither species really comes out on top, and ultimately the movie ends teasing the next one, which I kind of wish they never made. This one's going in B tier, and for me, it's going right below Alien Resurrection. Alien vs. Predator, Requiem. Oh boy, it is not often that a movie teases a sequel, and I viscerally wish they did not make the sequel. That's kind of the whole point of teasing it, is because they want you to get hooked onto the next one, but this movie successfully avoided that hype entirely. I'll be completely honest, I sort of lost interest as soon as the Predator ship crash landed in middle of nowhere, USA. Unlike the first crossover, this one did not get the memo that we don't give a crap about the humans. There's way too much human stuff going on, and not enough Predator on Xenomorph action. Again, I'm making an exception here, but I think we can all agree that this is neither the time or the place to get invested in a whole new set of people. I want to see what's going on with the big freaky aliens, dang it! So take a step back, a few quick production complaints that I have for this movie before I go any further. It is so dark, like visually, not thematically, visually. It is dark to look at. It's trying to be broody, and I know they're trying to do something cool and they're being edgy, but it is not a great look. I can't even tell what's going on half the time. Feels like some production intern set the ND filter way too high on all these cameras. And along those same lines, one of my notes says, feels more like a made-for-TV movie, and I definitely stand by that comment. The production budget was significantly lower than the last one, and it shows. It's kind of painful to watch in some cases. In a movie where the biggest draw is the crossover between the two alien species, it doesn't have a lot of that. Just look at it purely from a third-party perspective. What is the point of having the Predators there? Like, just what's the point? If their ship crashed and the rest of the crew died to the Xenomorph, then what's the point of the Predators even coming to find it? What do they have to gain by killing these very few rogue Xenomorphs on Earth? There's certainly no indication that they want to protect humans from a Xenomorph outbreak. So why did they get the heck out of there when they found out the other crew was already dead? The ending is also just so atrocious. Instead of finding a way to make it truly Alien vs. Predator, they have the US government drop a freaking nuke on their own city. What? It's like if at the end of the original Avengers, instead of sending the bomb through the wormhole, Tony Stark just gets the frick out of there and lets the bomb blow up the Chitauri and one of the world's biggest metropolitan areas. Like, what? No, you can't just do that. Certainly not without a good enough reason. And keep in mind, at this point, the US government doesn't even know what the Xenomorphs are, how they reproduce, or even if the nuke would actually do anything to stop them. Okay. Credit where credit is due. The one cool thing about this movie is the Predalien. Predator morph into alien, Xenomorph alien thing is cool, okay? It's fine, it's cool. But even then, it's severely underutilized. I wanted to see how this Predalien would use, like, advanced tech and then rip somebody's face off. But no, it never pans out. I do like that they keep expanding on the lore of the Xenomorph biology. That's pretty cool. And that they can merge with whatever host the embryo is planted in. But you gotta use it. If you show it to me, you gotta use it. It's just Chekhov's gun all over again. You can't show me the Predalien and then not use the Predalien well, okay? Chekhov would be ashamed. Anyway, that's about it. Nothing much to say about this movie. Predalien's cool, the rest is hot trash. I could definitely keep ranting about how this movie is such low-quality slop, but I won't waste my time. It's going in D tier because that's the lowest tier on my list. You know what? No, that's not good enough. Here. Right where you belong. Prometheus. This movie signaled a huge shift in the franchise, and for me, a welcome one. Starting with Prometheus, you really get a totally fresh start from the rest of the franchise. It doesn't feel like the last couple movies, and it really doesn't even feel like the original, even though Ridley Scott is back to direct it. First of all, the cast is fantastic. Idris Elba is always great and brings that aura. Guy Pearce plays a good wrinkled old skin sack, and Michael Fassbender is so good as a psycho android. I freaking love Michael Fassbender, severely underrated actor. The visuals in this movie are just so incredibly good, and it's obvious that the production budget has skyrocketed, especially after that terrible last one. I love the alien world that they've created, along with the secret goal of keeping Weyland alive. Seems like exactly what the creator of this evil galactic corporation would do to try and live forever. If anything, he's not enough of a jerk. I would have loved to see some more on just how cruel he is and how he's willing to sacrifice everything for himself. This movie really feels like we're getting back to the things that Ridley Scott set up in the first movie, and it harkens back to the original in a lot of ways, like David the android being the main antagonist, similar to Ash, the incubation of some nasty squid baby, just like the original chestburster, and of course, because it's Ridley Scott, we finally turned to good dialogue. That's refreshing, because it's been at least 2 movies since we got any. There's nothing that's particularly mind-blowing about any of the reveals to me, like David's secret mission and the ulterior motive of the trip. It all feels very par for the course in that sense, but that's not always a bad thing. I really think what lifts this movie to the next level for me is the engineers. There's so much in this movie building on the universe that explores how the bioengineering tech came to be, with the black goop and everything, and it even suggests that the engineers are the ones who created humans however long ago. Expanding to the lore of the universe in this kind of way reinvigorated the interest in the series for me, and it helped me get sucked back into the world. There didn't even need to be any Xenomorphs because the focus was more on the company and Weyland, and just like the original film in Ridley Scott's fashion, it's more of a slow burn, and I enjoyed that a lot. Again, this movie is fascinating to me. I'm not sure if it's because it came out 30 years apart from the first one and the production process has just changed so much, or if it's the CG, or what the heck it is, but Alien Covenant and this one don't really feel like alien movies. They're fantastic production-wise, and the plot is good, but it just doesn't feel like an alien movie, if you know what I mean. It feels like these two are kind of a side quest that goes on in the background of the real stuff that's happening, which is the people getting torn apart by the Xenomorphs. Not in a bad way, though. These movies stand well on their own, and there's no doubt that it adds a lot to the lore and the immersion into the world that Ridley Scott has created. It's just a very different tone from the original movie, or even the first few sequels. For me, I'd say this belongs in A tier, almost in a completely different realm, considering what I'm saying the mainstream alien movies are. Alien Covenant. I'm really quite torn on this one. I think I wanted it to be a lot better than it actually was. Michael Fassbender is still great as David the android, and there's no doubt that the visuals and the world building live up to the same standard as Prometheus. It's gorgeous to watch, and I love getting to explore more of the background of the engineers and seeing how David is credited as sort of this bioevolutionary creator of the Xenomorphs. Or at least this version of the Xenomorphs. It's very unclear between my watching of the films and what I've found after looking online if the Xenomorphs that we see in the OG Alien film are the same Xenomorphs that David creates. Pause. Or I should add, if they're even the same version that we see in Alien Earth. Please continue. If they are, then it seems that there's been a little bit of an oopsie on the canon front, because what I've seen other people say is that David created what they're calling the protomorphs, or neomorphs, and they're very similar, but not the exact same version that we see in the original 1979 film.
We are same, but different.
Maybe one of you guys out there can explain it to me in the comments, because as of recording this video, I'm still a little bit confused. Ridley Scott was not afraid of the gore at all in this movie, and I love it. It's definitely one of the more brutal in the series, with people just kind of getting maunched left and right. And once again, it's a bit of a slower burn before we finally find David and all that he's been getting up to on this planet alone. But this does have more action that comes before that, and of course we get people getting attacked on the surface of the new alien planet, etc., etc., and the dialogue is very believable and natural. I didn't hear anything that felt forced or not needed. The twist at the end of this movie I think is fantastic. I won't say it's totally unexpected, because when you show identical androids emerging from a deathmatch, then in a movie like this you're just expecting it to be the bad one. But it was very visceral and terrifying nonetheless. It does drag on just long enough that you're like, well, maybe this is the good guy, I don't know, before he puts them into cryosleep and he's just terrifying. I can't imagine. It literally makes me claustrophobic and antsy just watching it. The good thing is it's done in such a way that you don't really feel terrible at the end, because nobody cares about these people, and we've already seen what happens literally hundreds of years into the future, so ultimately if we're operating under the assumption that David is the creator of the true Xenomorphs, then this scene at the end just serves as a way to explain how the Xenomorphs got out into the galaxy to begin with. And I like that explanation. I should also mention that from what I've seen, there was originally planned to be a third movie to wrap up this prequel trilogy, and even connect some of the dots that lead back to the original movie where they find the eggs and the engineer jockey, all that stuff. I would have loved to see this. And of course, Michael Fassbender would have killed it. Let's be honest, he's just my man crush of the series. Maybe we'll still get it someday. Again, I wasn't the biggest fan of this movie, but it definitely expanded on the lore of the universe, and I'm just a sim for Michael Fassbender, so yeah, I think I'll stick this healthily at the top of B tier. Alien Romulus. This movie is awesome. I've been so excited to talk about it because I think it's genuinely a great film. I'll even say something bold. I think this movie is the most alien film since Alien. It may not be directed by Ridley Scott, but this guy, Fede Alvarez, gets it. There's so much to love, so let's break it down a little bit. The protagonist, Rain, is great. The only other movie I've seen this actress Kaylee Spaney in was this disgrace of a Pacific Rim sequel that I don't acknowledge, but she's fantastic. I want to see her in more stuff. Her relationship with Andy, her brother/android, is cool. I like the way they navigate that, and of course, if you've seen the movie, it makes it more visceral when Andy gets compromised by the company's programming. Really, I haven't cared as much about the characters in one of these movies probably since Aliens with an S. You're really immersed into their world and their terrible life of mining on this barren planet, and you want them to be successful in getting the heck out of there. The Weyland Company is portrayed as it should be, a greedy, inhuman, uncaring, profit-driven entity, and using Andy, it makes it much more of a serious, unintentional betrayal. Their little ragtag team of friends is a great dynamic, but at the same time, it balances well, making sure that you're not absolutely crushed when one of them gets killed systematically by the Xenomorphs. I just love the setup of going to explore a space station that's already crashing into the planet's rings. It's such a good setup and a trap for them to get stuck in with the galaxy's apex predators. It harkens a lot back to the original film with the cool sci-fi space station design and of course the horror. Oh my gosh, the horror in this movie is great. It hasn't been this good since Alien. This movie finds that perfect balance, and I think it's just so good. I already mentioned it, but the ending with the creepy hybrid thing makes the most sense in this movie to me. Like I said earlier, the newborn and Ressurection was kind of meh, the Predalien was kind of cool, but this one felt really real. Like, okay, she's already pregnant, and the black goo saved her life, but it screwed up the baby into whatever this thing is. That's believable, and that's scary. Not particularly pleasant, but it's totally in the cards for a sci-fi movie. A couple other little things I liked about this movie. I loved getting to see the Xenomorphs and their acid blood in a zero-G environment. That was really cool. I love the incorporation of the black goo from the previous two movies. It wraps up together nicely with the prequels as well. And I really like the ending. It's very similar to the original movie with Rain and face off against this final boss in a space battle and soaking up all that XP. And it ends even with a twinge of hope that maybe after all that crap that they just went through, she can have a better life out there somewhere in the galaxy. I like that. I'm not truly a horror fan, honestly, and I won't subject myself to too much that I find creepy, so maybe I'm not the expert on the genre, but as a general audience member, I like watching a movie where there's a feeling of some hope at the end, even if it's not great. It doesn't have to be much, and in some situations you can totally do without it, but in this one, I liked it a lot. This film is great, absolutely great. I know this is controversial, and I'm going to piss some people off, but I'm going to put it in S tier. I genuinely can't think of anything I would change about this movie, except that I might make it a tiny bit shorter. But that's it. It's that good. Alien Earth, Season 1. Okay, now originally I was not going to include this in the video, but since it just came out, we might as well throw it in as a little bonus. I finally got around to watching it, and I must say, I quite enjoyed it. Of course, being a show and not a 2-hour movie, it's significantly slower paced than the movies. But you know what? I'm cool with it. You get more time to explore the characters and their motivations, which, if you've seen any of my videos before, you know that's something I love. There's a lot of super cool situations that are explored in this series, like the downed ship carrying the specimens, the tropical island is a cool setting for Prodigy's research, and I love getting to explore more of how the world is controlled by these big 5 companies. That, just naturally, harkens back to the original and its critique of the corporation, and how they interact with the series naturally cements it as sort of a dystopian oligarchy that's reached interstellar travel. Speaking of dystopian oligarchs, Cavalier is a fantastic antagonist. Samuel Blanken plays this high-functioning psycho-trillionaire so well, it reminds me a lot of Paul Dano's Riddler in The Batman. You really get to see how smart this dude is, but also he's extremely unhinged, entitled, and sociopathic. It's a difficult thing to balance, but he does it so well. On the flip side of that, his kind of mirror in this series, Morrow, the cyborg, is so good, especially in this episode where it shows the events leading up to the ship crashing. He has such a commanding presence as he teeters on the edge of crazy and just highly motivated. The casting overall for this show is spectacular. I love it. I do like that they kept the female protagonist in the form of Wendy/Marcy, and I love her relationship with her brother. The two of them really feel like siblings who have been apart for too long, and Hermit no longer has any control over his little sister, the hybrid. While on the topic of hybrids, we don't really see these anywhere else in the universe so far, so I'm assuming future seasons will expand on why they've fallen out of favor, or perhaps the technology gets lost after the events of Alien Earth. Having the children inhabit these adult bodies leads to some really funny dialogue, and the casting was just fantastic again. And I especially like these two, Smee and Slightly. They portray that so well. Even just their mannerisms, the way they like cross their arms or frump about, and the way they move is a little goofy, but it's not over the top. It's just so fun to watch. Now, I do have a complaint. I'm not sure if it's just me, but the Xenomorphs in this show, their movements look so goofy. Like, more than the other movies. I know it's always a little bit rigid on purpose, but like, come on. It's been 40 years since the OG. You think we can make a better alien suit that doesn't look like some dude just scrambling around in latex? I know that's picky, but I feel like we could have figured this out by now. Overall, I thought the show was really solid. I really enjoyed the perspective of the businesses clashing on Earth. The introduction of the hybrids is really believable, and it's a great setup for the show's events, and overall, it just felt very true to the themes of the original, even if it's a little less horror. I'll stick this solidly in A tier right below Aliens with an S. And there it is. That's the ranking in all of its glory. Pause the video if you'd like to, or if you skip to the end. Here's my ranking in list form, if for those of you that prefer the bulleted medium. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe. I put out new videos whenever I feel like it. Thanks, gang. Much love. I'll catch you guys in the next one.